And all set, Scott? Okay. And I will call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. We have two sets of minutes to deal with tonight. The first one is July 19th, 2022. Is there a motion?
Move we accept them subject to modification.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2. And page 3. Hearing no corrections then, all those in favor of approving the minutes of July 19th, 2022, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And we have the minutes of August 2nd, 2022. Is there a motion?
Move we accept subject to modification.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Page 1. And page 2. So here are no corrections. All those in favor of approving the minutes of August 2nd, 2022, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? And Greta abstains. And no opposition. So we're up to public comment, and this is the opportunity for anyone in the audience here in the room or on Zoom to make public comments on any issue they wish to. Any comments from people in the room? Seeing none. Anyone on Zoom who wishes to make any public comment?
Nope, no one on Zoom, Terry.
Okay. So then we'll move on to item number 4, and that's interviews and appointments. And I think we have one person in the room for an interview. Helen? Okay. Helen Morgan Parmet. If you want to come to the table.
Terry, Shannon's in the room. Helen's online.
Oh.
So,
Helen's online. I thought you said nobody on Zoom.
So Helen's on Zoom?
yeah, would you like me to go to Helen
Okay.
first? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Helen, I'm going to connect you online just a moment. I'll make you a panelist so you can share your video if you like.
So welcome Helen. Can you hear me?
Looks like you might be muted, Helen. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I'll fix that. Must be a setting here. 1 second here. Sorry about that, Helen. Try that. There we go.
Okay, yes, I can hear you all. Thank you.
Good, we can hear you too. So welcome to the Select Board meeting. And tonight we're interviewing you for the Town Meeting TV Board of Directors. And we do have your application in front of us. But for the people who haven't seen that before, we'd like to have you give a brief description of your background and why you'd like to be a member of the Town Meeting TV Board.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so I'm associate professor in the Department of English at the University of Vermont, where I'm also the Edwin W. Lawrence Forensic Professor of Speech and the director of the Lawrence Debate Union. My research is in critical media studies, where I look at TV studies specifically, and I've done quite a bit of research on public, educational, and governmental access TV. A big project that I'm engaged in right now looks specifically at the history of CCTV. or Town Meeting TV. So it's an organization that I've been involved with for a long time in terms of I brought my classes there many times, and I've also sort of worked with them through, doing the primary election coverage and various other, panels that I've been on that they've hosted around media literacy and such. And so it's an organization that I care a lot about, and I want to see them be successful. And I know that right now is a particularly challenging time for public educational government access programming because of the phenomenon of cord cutting, where people are less likely to subscribe to cable because they can, purchase streaming services directly from content providers. And so because that's such a big part of access television's funding, their future, I think, is really sort of uncertain, or it's in a moment of flux. And I feel so invested, I think, especially in Vermont's PEG programming, that it's something that I really want to be involved in. And I'm particularly impressed with the kind of advocacy work that they've been doing at Town Meeting TV. Like Lauren Glenn Daviton has just been, really amazing. So when they said that there was a position available as a trustee or on the board of directors, I thought that was a way that I could kind of give back to Town Meeting TV, since they've been, just really generous with me with my research and their time and so forth. So that's a little bit, I think, about me and my interest in Town Meeting TV. When I applied, I didn't know that there were other people that were interested. So I'm happy to, I'm happy. I think it's great that there are multiple people that want to support the television program.
Thank you very much. You certainly have great credentials to bring to us for the appointment. So any questions from members of the board?
I would just clarify, Helen and the board, Helen's the only applicant for this position.
Yeah.
The other interviews for another position.
Right.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood.
Jenny has been our representative for many, many years.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we appreciate all of her hard work on this as well.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
questions from members of the board?
Well, Helen, hi. Jeff here. First question, kind of, I assume, an easy one. What does the acronym PEG stand for?
Public Educational and Government Access Programming.
Okay. I got the PE, the G I wasn't so clear on. Given your qualifications, it's hard to envision how you wouldn't be really good as our representative. So my question, usually I'm along the lines of asking questions to see why you're good. I'm going to ask it in a different aspect for you. Given that you are so well qualified, what are the liabilities of you being so well qualified? If any.
That's a tough question. I thought you were going to say, where do you sort of lack? And I think the budgetary stuff is where I lack. Like, even though I know a lot about where the funding issues and holes are, when I look at those numbers, sometimes, I'm in the humanities, so it's not necessarily like I am an economist, or in finance, so that I, know exactly, that I can spot small financial errors. So I think that's something, but I have been on boards before. So I've looked at a lot of financial documents. I was on the board of a nonprofit cinema when I was at Western Washington University. So I do have experience in that area. In terms of my sort of maybe over involvement in the research of PEG, what is the liability there? I think that in some ways, it's nice when boards really don't know the work because they don't get over involved in programming or determining the mission, because I think that the people who are there on the day-to-day really should be doing that. And I think, maybe it's a liability that I'm over, I know probably more about, the history and the practice and the sort of production capacities of television that might be, I guess, a little bit of a liability, but I, would knowing that, especially having been on boards before, I think that it is important to kind of like take that step back and use that information when it's helpful to the people who are on the ground doing the day-to-day work running the TV channel.
Well, thank you. And you actually got into my next question, which is you mentioned the challenging times and what you see as some of the challenges facing, the organization faces. What are your thoughts on how do you address that?
I think that it's really a legislative solution, and I'm impressed with the legislative or advocacy work that both the Media Factory and Town Meeting TV have been doing. And I know that they're currently, a lot of the funding that they're, sort of missing from some of those cable subscriptions is being made up through bridge funding that was like COVID funds from the legislature. I think looking at more long-term legislative funding is probably like one of those areas, and thinking about, becoming part of a regular line item budget. And I think during COVID, right now, this legislative session is being streamed thanks to Town Meeting TV. So I do think that it really is a public service, and so that it deserves some form of public funding. And then I think the second avenue is in philanthropy. And I know that Town Meeting TV has already been doing a lot of that work. And so trying to sort of kick that into gear, probably some, fundraising and philanthropic work is going to be important, as it is for like any nonprofit organization.
Okay, good, thank you. And my last question, and for some reason this tends to fall on me to ask it, it's a conflict of interest question. And, simply stated, how would you recognize a conflict of interest, and what would you do about it?
A conflict of interest in terms of,
for instance, what you might be doing for research.
Right, yes. Oh, okay, absolutely. So if there was some sort of conflict for interest where my research, would be interfering with the, if it would influence in some way what they were doing in a way that seemed unethical, I would recuse myself from any discussion, right, that had anything to do with my research that would be, anathema to, right, if it would be like I was trying to get my research to have a particular answer, I would have to remove myself from those conversations. I mean, my research is mostly historical and about the sort of larger landscape of the political economy of television. And so I don't see there being a real conflict of interest, but certainly if there was, I would just recuse myself from those conversations.
All right, good, thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, thanks for those questions.
Yeah, sure.
If there's no further questions, then there is a suggested motion.
Move to appoint Helen Morgan Parmet as the town's representative to the Town Meeting TV trustees.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations, and thank you very much for your interest in doing this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is a great honor, and I am, I've been a resident of Williston for a few years now, and I'm happy to give something back to this awesome town.
Good, thank you. We appreciate that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm my son's off to college tomorrow, so I'm gonna leave the meeting and go finish helping him get packed. But yeah, I appreciated meeting everybody, and thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
So next we have, for the Cemetery Commission, Shannon Hiltner. And Shannon, sorry, I got you confused. So if you would, the same thing for you, if you'd give us a brief description of your background and why you feel you'd like to be on the Cemetery Commission.
Why I volunteered for this. I moved to the town in 2010, and I did a stint with the Town Planning Commission for several years. Did a couple rounds of the town plan meetings, and also have been on the Friends of the Library Board for most of my tenure in the town. active resident, had a child go through the system, and I believe strongly in public service. And I was looking for a way to pick up some additional service that I wanted it to be meaningful to me. So I thought this would be a good opportunity, since I grew up in a family where my father was the one that was on the cemetery commission, so I know what it entails. He was the one that put the flags on every holiday and took them off, so the respect of it from my family is very significant. And I'm also a huge history dork. So from the perspective, I'm a Vermont Archaeological Society and other, making sure that the cemeteries are well maintained and that the histories are preserved. And I'm also, being on the various boards, I've been through multiple rounds of the budget for the town, so I am very comfortable with the budget process and understand it. My life history, I did IT risk security for the Department of Treasury in my prior life before I came to Williston. So again, very comfortable with budgets and hearings and meetings. So that's really most of it. I went and sat at the meeting with the Cemetery Commission last week just to get a feel for it and get to know the group and make sure I asked questions and that there weren't any surprises. There were a few, but I'm good with them. So that's pretty much, and I do know it's a 5-year commitment.
Good.
So.
Thank you very much. Questions from members of the board?
First of all, thank you for your extensive service to Williston. Folks like you are what, make this town really so wonderful. Quickly, what would you see as, some priorities or things that you might like to see as priorities for the Cemetery Commission?
Well, I think first off, I'd just like to say I think they're doing a really great job. And I see that our cemeteries are well maintained, and it is a reflection of a community, to quote someone I spoke with recently. I love the history of our town, and I love that we have an opportunity to do this. And sorry, I'm a little nervous. I haven't spoken in front of a camera ever. So I just went blank. Sorry, Greta.
No, take your time.
I don't remember the question.
What would you see as, things you would like to see as priorities for the cemetery?
Priorities. I mean, just making sure that the maintenance is handled. I actually would like to work more with the Vermont Archaeological Society and maybe work with the schools as an opportunity so that the history isn't lost for an integration there in the community. We have, as a history buff, we have people in our cemeteries that date all the way back to the 1700s in every single war, including women in the Revolutionary War, that I think there's a good opportunity for crossover. But it's meaningful to make sure that people are protected and respected, and that's really my biggest priority.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No, I guess more of a comment. I was going to ask you, are you sure you know what you're getting into? But the way you answered Greta's question and you gave your introduction, I think so.
There were responsibilities that I didn't know it entailed, like being there for the certificates during interments.
Okay. Huh.
And that was something I had to think long and hard about, because it's hard.
Yeah.
And death is a serious, difficult thing that unfortunately in my family we've experienced firsthand.
Yeah.
So it's a little deeper and a little more personal, but once I reflected on that, I felt that it's a straightforward way of giving back to the community.
That's a function I did not realize.
Me either.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm guessing it's not appropriate for me to ask the conflict of interest, or may not be appropriate to ask the conflict of interest question.
I don't know anybody buried there.
You might, though.
I might. I have to go look,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. One thing I would I think it'd be interesting to hear as you have more of an opportunity to be in the cemeteries and looking at the gravestones and your own personal interest in, the history and archaeological, if I said it correctly, aspects of it, next year's cemetery report could be a very interesting one.
I do have a journalism degree, but don't hold that against me.
Not me. I'm an engineer. I have trouble speaking plainly sometimes.
Yeah, I look forward to using my skills
Yeah. Okay,
in
good.
a variety of ways to help out.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
If there's no further questions, then there is a motion suggested.
Move to appoint Shannon Hiltner to Cemetery Commission for an unexpired 5-year term through June 30, 2027.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll be interested to see who got it, next meeting.
So I have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So congratulations. We look forward to having you on the commission. So
Sure, I'll
thanks
be
again.
seeing you.
So moving right along to the temporary event permits, and we have 3 to look at tonight. And Eric, you're going to start the process going here.
Yep, 3 permits. I previewed a couple for the board, and we've got a couple folks either on Zoom or in the room to answer any questions the board might have on a couple of these. And just a reminder for folks watching at home, this is part of the town's new temporary event ordinance that certain permits will be reviewed by the select board. It depends on the scope of the event. So the first one is an event this weekend at Red Bar Gardens, the Nightshade Festival. And there's also a catering permit attached to it from Foam Brewers. Staff's reviewed the application. Representatives from police, fire, and the manager's office performed a site visit a week and a half ago. There were some conditions placed on the applications from staff that event organizers have met, and they shared some photos today with me that they made some of the, all of the site recommendations from staff for additional fire extinguishers and egress and a fence around the small pond. So staff is very comfortable with that result of the process here. I've got the event organizer, Guthrie, over Zoom that I can connect if the board has any additional questions for him on this event this weekend.
Good, thank you. I think there were possibly some questions regarding the bring your own bottle issue on this one.
Yep.
And
Guthrie, I'm going to connect you. I'll just hit allow to talk, then you'll be able to speak with the board. And Guthrie, if you could just unmute, please. Oh, maybe I have to ask him. There we go. Sorry about that, Guthrie. Can you?
All right, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
well, welcome
Everybody.
to the select board meeting, and we've had the opportunity to review the application during the course of several days anyway, that we've had the information. And I know that there were some questions that came about from the select board regarding the BYOB policy for the event. And how do you feature regulating that?
Well, as it stands, there actually is no BYOB at the event. We've announced Foam Brewers as our official beverage partner and provider for the festival. So they are going to be the only source of alcoholic beverages permitted on the site, under our purview. And I have a few ways leading up to the event and during the event that we're hoping to enforce that and supervise that. And of course, I'd be open to hearing some more suggestions. Would you like me to kind of go over those points that we're going to be putting in place during the event?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Great. All right. So in addition to just featuring Foam Brewers very prominently as our beverage provider, making it a point of advertising kind of anywhere we're putting out the event. We are also going to be doing a few things that directly mention the restriction of BYOB. The first is a little FAQ kind of things to know sheet, a graphic design that I put together. And this will be put out on our social media accounts, and it will also be emailed to all ticket holders leading up to the event. And I'd be happy to share that FAQ. Well, I'm not sure if the share screen is available or if that would be helpful or not. But it just details some important info to know. And among that is a mention of there being no BYOB at the event, and also if all attendees could avoid bringing glass, something that we're trying to reinforce there. So this FAQ sheet will also be presented on display at the admissions booth, and we'll have staff at the admissions booth who are verbalizing a few of the major points on that FAQ sheet to ticket buyers and attendees who are coming in at the door. And additionally, beyond the admissions staff, we're going to have between 20 and 25 other volunteer staff on site, and all of them know about our policy on BYOB, that there is none, and that foam is the one handling the sale and distribution of alcohol, and they'll be able to observe and remind people if needed to, of that policy, and to return anything that they do bring to their car, and just let them know, hey, we're very happy to have foam brewers here. They make great stuff, and we don't want to put them in risk, or the property owners or ourselves in any jeopardy. So those are just a few of the things that we'll be doing leading up to the event and during the event. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments on that, as well as suggestions for other ideas to make that as clear as possible.
Good, thanks. Anybody has any other questions for the organizers?
I have one, and I'll try to be brief here. My question is along the lines of how important or seriously should you enforce the BYOB, for lack of better words, policy for this event? And specifically, I'm thinking of festivals that I've been to where they actually will search any bags or backpacks bringing in. Do you feel that's necessary?
I don't feel it's particularly necessary to be searching bags. A few reasons for that. Foam Brewers is a credible brewery. They're well known within the area, and I think just us very straightforwardly putting out that they're our beverage partner. They're the ones handling the alcoholic beverages. I think just as people would acknowledge that going into a bar, they'll both respect it and acknowledge it as a rule going into the festival. But I think it is a serious point to enforce, because obviously safety is our number one concern, and while we want to create a fun environment for people to be enjoying the music, enjoying the food, there are a lot of things that we could be doing that people might not be thinking of, to kind of guide that experience and to make it safe and to make it better for everybody.
Other questions?
I mean, it just seems to me, and this is more a comment for everybody, is to the degree that BYOB is enforced, is up to the event organizers, not for us to necessarily dictate. Okay?
Yep. If there are no other questions, then regarding this particular event, there is a motion.
I'll move to approve a temporary event permit and a catering permit for the Nightshade Festival to be held on October the 27th.
August 27th.
What did I say, October?
Yes.
God. This year is just going way too fast. August, and I'm making it go even faster. August 27th, 2022, at the Red Barn Gardens.
Is there a second? There is a second. Is there any discussion then on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, moving right along to the next event.
Yep. The next one is a cyclocross event at Catamount Community Forest coming up on October the 8th, and an accompanying catering permit from the Zen Barn. Staff's also reviewed this application and provided conditions of approval for the select board's consideration. The fire department, Chief Collette, performed a site visit on Monday, made an EMT coverage plan with the organizer to include one AEMT level provider, and keeping our UTV on site if needed for any response during the event. I believe Ben Coleman's here. And Ben can answer any additional questions that the board may have on this application.
Good.
So
Thank you.
before we start discussing it, first of all, I live on Governor Chittenden Road, border, well, not the community forest property, and also good chance I'll be attending this thing, so I don't know if that means I should recluse myself.
People have to live somewhere, and so I don't think that.
I tried the homeless thing, it didn't work out.
I don't think that's a problem with me anyway. But
Okay, good, thank you.
so, are there questions then for the organizers on this particular event? I think this has happened before, isn't it? The second year.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
It was a long-standing event years and years ago. We resurrected it last year.
Any other questions?
Do you want to describe the event slightly? Because I doubt just select board members know what cyclocross means.
Yeah. So it's sort of a niche sport within cycling. So it's a bit of a hybrid between mountain bike racing and road racing. So the bikes look more like a road bike, but the courses are primarily, it's mixed surface, but they're mostly off-road, short circuit. So racers will do multiple laps on a short circuit. The races last about 45 minutes. So we'll have different races throughout the day for different categories and age groups. And it's about a 1.5 mile course. So it's well contained. It's spectator friendly. You can see the racers quite a bit. It's mostly all on the meadow side of Catamount. So people come through. It's about a 7 to 10 minute lap time, depending on your fitness and abilities. So it's fun, spectator friendly racing.
So the question I have, and maybe this is unfortunate that I have some knowledge of this type of racing and the audience participation in, what would be the right words, how they support or not the racers. So really what I'm getting to is, I want to make sure I phrase this correctly. Alcohol can be a big part of that audience participation. With that said, how will you be able to monitor the participants to make sure that there is not excessive consumption of beer?
Yeah, to the best of our abilities. I mean, it's like I said, it's a fairly compact, contained race course. So it's not like people are 2 miles out in the woods. We have Lawson's as our beer sponsor, and so we have a dedicated alcohol provider. So people will be encouraged to support them.
So they know what they're doing.
Yes, yeah. And then as far as it's now town property, and I'm assuming that there's no outside alcohol permitted there, so we can communicate that adequately within our media to participants. So, and I mean, similarly, if someone is out of line, we can ask them to remove themselves.
Okay. All right. I mean, good. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, so cyclocross originated, for those that aren't familiar, it's a very Belgian sport, so Belgium and beer go hand in hand, so the cyclocross racing and beer history go hand in hand in Belgium, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And some of that has come over here to the States.
Yes.
Very good, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, then I'm looking for a motion.
Move to approve a temporary event permit and a catering permit for the Green Mountain Cyclocross Race to be held on October 8, 2022 at the Catamount Community Forest.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Just that when I was a younger man, I used to play basketball with people who would be drinking Zima. It was a vodka carbonated drink. Didn't last, either the basketball games or the Zima product, but anyway, keep an eye out on those people.
Of course.
I think SEMA was ahead of its time. It seems to be the thing now.
Were the people trying to sneak Zima into the?
Yeah. It was a thing. I didn't do it.
All right. If there is no more discussion, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, congratulations.
Okay. Thank you.
And we're up to the third one.
Yep. Last one is a wedding at Red Barn Gardens on September the 10th. Staff also reviewed it, similar the same time for the music festival this weekend. Similar conditions. The applicants proved that they meet all these conditions for mainly fire, life safety on the property. Motion for the board to consider, along with their caterer for the event, American Flatbread.
Any questions regarding this particular event? If not, then I'm,
BYO for this one.
if not, then I'm looking for a motion on this one.
I'll move to approve a temporary event permit and a catering permit for a September 10th, 2022 wedding at Red Barn Gardens.
Second.
Is there any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So we've taken care of all of the temporary event and catering permits for the ones that were on the agenda. And we're moving on then to item number 6, the diversity, equity, and inclusion town value statements. And Eric, you're going to lead off on that?
Krista Lee's joining us as well, so I'll give an introduction here.
Welcome, Crystal Lee.
Thanks.
So as the board may recall, a group of community volunteers has been working with the Community Justice Center. They've drafted possible town value statement language pertaining to diversity, equity, inclusion for the select board's consideration. I've included with your agenda materials a memo and additional materials from Community Justice Center Executive Director Crystal Lee McSweeney that outlines the process to arrive at the value statements and a proposed plan forward. Crystal Lee will give an overview this evening. Staff is seeking feedback on the value statement language and direction for the group to consider finalizing its work for the board. And looking at next steps here with value statements, once finalized, would then be incorporated into a new select board town values policy that staff would prepare for consideration at a future meeting. Then this policy would be the basis to seek community feedback on visual representation of the town's values, a process that the Community Justice Center would take the lead in undertaking starting later this fall. So I'll turn over to Crystal Lee to provide her overview.
Sure. So good evening, everyone. So as you know, back in March of 2022, we came forward with wanting to talk about how to bring the town of Williston closer to having some values around and visualizations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And since then, we have undertaken what I would consider to be a pretty in-depth process within the town of Williston. We attempted to distribute, I think it was close to 175, if not more, flyers to various businesses and organizations throughout the town. And 73 of those flyers were accepted, and the remainder of them were declined for various reasons. And within that scope, we also did some community outreach, seeking people's input around what they would like to see, what they cared about most. That include phone calls, emails. We posted things to Front Porch Forum, the library had assisted with at the Federated Church, as well as some other organizations. And we came together with a few more community volunteers, which I thought was great, and talked about the feedback that we received from folks, and went through a pretty intensive process where we worked in teams. And we kind of took the language that people shared with us, the values that they shared with us, and tried to incorporate them into something that was a little bit more clear and succinct for all of your viewing. And what I can share is that it wasn't an easy process. One would think that putting together a sentence or two could be pretty quick, but it wasn't. But it was really enjoyable to get together with some new community members and see what we can do to elevate Williston to a better place. So we have shared with you in your packet what our suggested value statements would be. You'll note that some of them have only one statement, while a few of them have two or three, and that's because it was difficult to come up with one statement that we all agreed upon, and also wanting to take into account, the process, and wanting some feedback from all of you in terms of what might feel best for the town. So those are included here, and then once we, as Eric shared, once we're able to get to a place of accepting and adopting these values, we have a plan moving forward for how to engage the community and finding the best ways to visualize these values. And part of that proposal is that I have applied and been accepted into the Cornell program for DEI leadership, it's pretty intensive, but it will start in a couple of weeks and end in hopefully the end of November with a culminating project, which I would request that the culminating project really be the visualization for Williston, and creating that process and how we can do that successfully and through a reputable organization that helps leaders in the community bring us to this place.
Well, congratulations on being accepted into the Cornell course.
Thank you.
It's a great thing. So tonight you're looking for feedback on the value statements.
Correct.
And so there are essentially 4 different categories that you're looking at. I presume you're asking us to try to come up with our particular favorites on the ones that have more than one part to them.
Correct.
So we can start with some discussion at the board level. At that night, unfortunately, we're missing one of our members tonight due to illness, but he can watch this all on TV. So who would like to make any comments?
So the idea is like looking at the anti-racism headline. There are two. The goal here would be to give a input as to which of the 2 options the board. Okay. All right. Well, if I can go first on that one, I would say the first one I like because it is more specific. Identifying, addressing, eliminating policies and procedures that have contributed to institutional and structural racism through education, community engagement, and restorative actions. I think that is a well-stated and specific enough statement. So it's not that the other one is bad. I just like this one better.
My thoughts were similar, and I would agree that I would rather have number 1 as well. Other comments?
Overall, I agree. I think that number 1 is probably addresses more. Although I will say, I think that number 2 kind of takes a much more firm and clear acknowledgement of the existence of structural and institutional racism that exists within most, if not all, governmental bodies. And so maybe if there was a way to add, that we as a town, will acknowledge, this might be a little bit more clear within statement number 1.
I'll wait till Crystally's done writing.
I'm okay. I can multitask.
Well, one general comment is that I'm not always sure I'm going to be able to choose between, two statements under each of the headings. So one question may be, do we have to always choose one over the other? The answer may be yes, the answer may be no. The other general question I had is, these statements are all more proactive, and I understand, shared, values. So our values tend to be proactive. And my question, and it's an honest question in the sense that I don't know the answer to this question, is it possible to have statements that are also somewhat, what's the right words, where we won't tolerate type of statements? Eliminate is along those lines, but it's different. And so I'm just looking for feedback on that.
Yeah, great question, Jeff, and I think this is, some of what we were struggling with too, and we believe that in order to move forward, we do need to have kind of a solid value that we can fall back to, and we believe that, anything that we do will be, reflective of that. In terms of, language and, putting in tolerance, I think there's other things, that we could do within the town that state that we're not tolerant of, of racism. And I think that, one of those ways is to accept the state statement. That's one thing that we could do. But I think, again, just looking for your feedback around, are there words, right, that are missing? Words are really important in this process. And I think that, there's a difference between having the value and then creating what I would say is more of a commitment statement to the values, which is what I think would come next, because I think as we go along, there will be different steps in our accomplishments.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. That kind of answers my questions. Yes, the values are more the positive, proactive, and then the commitment will be, these are things, may include, these are things that will not be tolerated, that type of, okay.
Right, and I also think, Jeff, that it's, as we continue to move forward and we take more actionable steps, I think that also will illustrate really clearly what our tolerances are and are not.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So I'm in favor of one over, one rings more, whatever, true to me. And anti-racism heading.
The second one is diversity. There's only one suggestion there, but does anybody wish to add some words or strike some words from that?
Just that there should be a period at the end of the sentence.
I was just thinking that.
Well spoken.
I couldn't even concentrate.
I had to give you something to.
This is when I read this sentence, without even really thinking about it, I added the words "and encouraged" to the end of it. So that's something that would work for me. So it would read, where are all celebrated and encouraged.
So, can I ask grammatically, what would that, you'd be encouraging all?
We would be encouraging all kinds. It's not only do we
So should we that all people are celebrated and encouraged?
Yes, okay, yeah. It was the, encourage, which is kind of the more celebrated is to me, we celebrate what we have. Encourage is we are recognizing that, we can change and grow in terms of diversity and the positive values of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm not sure if encouraged is necessarily even strong enough of a word to indicate that diversity is maybe a core value of our community. You know, that to indicate that we, you know, we want and are with our actions and policies, trying to grow to be a more diverse community. So I'm not positive about what language that would be, but I think that it's important to have a more forward-thinking kind of language item there.
Okay.
So I'd be happy to have it replaced with a stronger word.
If it encourages it, that's fine. I think encourage is almost a little passive for the importance of this.
Well, and I think these suggestions are really helpful. So then, you know, I can go back to the group and say, here are the thoughts of the select board, and we can wordsmith a little bit more.
And the next one is equity, and there's two different statements on this particular one. My preference was number one, and that I think number two is fine, but I really appreciate the thoughts in this first statement. That will strive to be fair and impartial with consistently reviewing and redefining town policies and procedures. And again, here's a period there too. Other comments?
That was my thought as well. Number one has more specificity.
Other thoughts?
Period at the end of number one. But also, I would love to see, and I think number two goes a bit further in acknowledging what equity might mean. And so I would love to see a greater acknowledgement of that in number one. You know, I appreciate that it's, you know, there's especially the line that some may require more than others. And I think that is a core piece of equity and equity-driven work. And so would love to see that included in number one. But then with the inclusion of that, I think number one would be preferable.
The key word I like in number one is key words is every decision. I like that. But I also like that last part of number two, recognizing that some may require more than others. So I don't know if there's a way to add that last part of number two to number one.
Can I ask about that, recognizing that some may require more than others? More what? More needs?
Right, I think there, you know, again, there's groups that have been marginalized and oppressed for a really long time and that who currently are, and so I think their needs might be different and at times might require more care and attention within certain things, for instance, housing. That's something that we know requires a lot of care, a lot of attention, a lot of empathy, because so many people have been without housing and without affordable or fair housing. And so when we were talking about that, we just recognized that there definitely are people, and especially if we think about the LGBTQIA plus, members of our community, people of different races. So wanting to recognize that depending on what the topic is, that there are certain people who might need more than others, and that it really is a responsibility and an obligation that we have to meet those needs.
And then the last one is inclusion. We have three different statements here. I was particularly like number one and number two, and that would be my preference.
I leaned toward number two. Again, it was the more detailed, and I thought that was the more detailed about.
I think they're all very different.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss to say that one is preferable to another, because I all think they address different things. And with some overlap, certainly. But I think that, I know we're certainly trying to limit it to one sentence for each statement, but I'm not sure that this would be best served by being a single sentence statement. I think that, again, there is so much that each addresses, that I wouldn't want to limit us in that way.
I can just quickly share that one of the things that we were trying to do is just stay consistent
Yeah.
with what the
I know.
kind of the structure of the current values
I know.
were. And, you know, as we, just to share, it's kind of a funny story, but as we were working on the values, we did kind of pre-work, and when we came together, some people had like a whole page, and we were like, wow, like we really are making really strong statements, and how do we take this really powerful, right, like need and expression and shrink it down into something that is clear and concise. And so I appreciate what you just said, because that's really where we all landed and why we gave you 3.
One of the difficulties in this work, though, is that, you know, and I'm going to use a term, and I don't mean it in any disparaging way at all, but it's hard to be doing this kind of stuff and not stumble over yourself to try to cover everything, because, you know, like, it doesn't say that this is our core value. Well, the fact that we're putting it down is our core value, and, you know, I can't imagine somebody looking at this and saying, well, it didn't say core value. And likewise, you know, I was on a committee once where we fought for over an hour on the phrase healthcare, fighting for healthcare reform or working for healthcare reform. It was an hour, fighting versus working. And it's like, wow, okay.
Words are powerful, Ted.
But I mean, you say that because, you know, number 2 is, you know, committed to creating equal opportunities, et cetera. Inherent in that would be identifying and overcoming barriers, as I see it. Inherent in that would be, you know, making sure that town programming and opportunities and leadership positions are accessible. So I think number 2 is actually more inclusive. But again, I don't say this in any way that this is. I know this is a lot. It's a big lift. It's heavy work. So, but I just say, you know, we're not going to be able to fit every word into everything.
So Crystal Lee, this inclusion is the one where, you know, my preference would be if we could somehow combine 2 and 3. I like the way under number 3 is committed to identifying and overcoming. Yes, I get it. You could, you know, you could read that or infer that into the above statement also, but sometimes when you say it, I guess it becomes a little more real. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's possible to do that, to combine the 2.
Yeah, I'd certainly say if you're gonna eliminate one just to make it easier for yourself, 1 would definitely be the one to at least work with the 2 and 3.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because as I read 1, I looked at it and I said, you know, it's kind of interesting. We're starting to define who this applies to, where everywhere else we said Williston. And once you explain the concept of the values, I think using the term Williston or our community, something like that, as opposed to trying to identify who we mean by that. Because in number 1, we start to talk about who we mean or what we mean. I don't know if that's at all helpful or more confusing than anything. So I'm reinforcing that I like the idea of 2 and 3 for inclusion. Somehow working that into one coherent, poetic, what other word should I throw in there?
I think that's good.
So I think we've given you some feedback on the our
Thank you.
project for tonight, so look forward to,
Sorry, just
Go ahead.
one more thing, and I'm not sure if this is something discussed or if this would be the DEI town value statement would be the place to do this, but did you discuss doing a land acknowledgement as part of our value statement?
So we did talk about it as a value statement, but we did talk about wanting to have that acknowledgement within the town in some way. So we thought that that would come as part of the visualization. And so once we get to that piece, but I think that's a great point, around land acknowledgement, and certainly happy to go back and speak to the group if that's something that, we think should go in as a town value.
No,
Because I think the
you're right.
request.
I think it's more, I can
Yeah,
see
because
it.
I think the request really was around, like
Right.
this piece around anti-racism and then bringing in the DEI.
Yep.
But I certainly, we've talked about the kind of more so the importance and the necessity for us to have land acknowledgement. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so the course that you're going to be taking at Cornell, will you be attending that in person?
No.
Okay.
No, it's all online, and it's a 16-week course shrunk up into 8 weeks, and so you get a professional certificate that I think will be really, really helpful for us to have within the town and be able to help lead this work. And I think also, as I shared in the memo, some other things that I'm involved in, working with the Chittenden Regional Planning Commission on their DEI board, and working on with the state level as well, to kind of look at how do we bring this really important work into our local towns, and do that in a way that feels really solid and unique, but also following best practice. And so I think that the Cornell certificate program will really help us do that work in Williston.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
yeah. Thanks for coming tonight.
Sure, thank you.
Moving on to the VLCT Welcome and Engaging Communities Cohort. We've discussed this in the past and asked Eric to proceed with this and come up with a letter of support. And Eric, you want to talk a little bit about where we're at with this?
Yep. This is a program that VLCT is launching. It's, as Terry mentioned, it's a competitive program. It's led by the consultant firm of Abundant Sun, working with VLCT. And they're creating a cohort of 15 municipalities in Vermont, with 2 representatives from each to go through a DEI training over the course of, I believe, 6 or 7 months. The first will be an in-person session at Town Fair in Killington this year by VLCT, and the rest will be over Zoom. So the requirements, the application's due by the end of this week. I've drafted in your packet responses to the application questions, and I've drafted a letter for the board's consideration, as a letter by the board is required for the application. I did notice a typo before I printed it out, so it's communities cohort, not community cohort, so I caught that one today. So I'm looking for feedback from the board. Is there anything the board would like to see changed in these materials? And also, I'm willing to serve as one of the 2 people for the town, but we would need a second person. It could be a select board member. If the select board member is not able to commit to the requirements of this, staff in the manager's office, Aaron is willing to serve as well in this. So just,
Okay.
we have to include the names on the application by the end of the week, so I have to figure that piece out here.
So we do have a proposed letter and also the proposed things to go with the application that Eric has drafted for us. Any comments on either one of the documents?
No. I'm glad we're applying.
Thank you for getting it together so quickly.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, well, once we have a motion to approve, to send a letter, do we have a select board member who is interested in putting the time in on this? And Jeff, you had suggested that you might be interested, but concerned about the time.
Time and when the training will take place, because if it takes place during the work hours, I am much less available than
Right.
if it were to take place at other times. Do you happen to know, Eric?
Let's see.
I know, for instance, the town fair will take place during work hours.
Yeah, it doesn't, they don't have a time defined for the Zoom sessions that I can see.
Okay,
It does say 7 virtual 2-hour EPIC education workshops between October of '22 and April of '23, but no time defined at this point.
Okay.
I wonder if that might be to be determined based on the
Yeah.
cohort participants.
It-
I could also ask.
that would be great. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I have the exact opposite reaction. So if it was during the work hours, it'd be much easier for me to participate. And so if you are able to find out that information and it does not work for Jeff's schedule, I would be happy to be considered.
Great. Well, I think it's great that we have 2 select board members, at least. And I suspect no matter what, whoever participates will get a lot out of it.
Yep.
So we need to know this by Friday for the submission of the letter and the application, right?
Yeah. I'll give Ted Brady a call tomorrow and see if he can share some information with me.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe out of the office.
Okay,
For family.
I'll reach out to someone.
Yeah.
In other words, talk to somebody who really knows the answer. To VLCT.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, we do need to act on the motion that we have before us. So one would be willing to make that motion.
Move to approve a letter of support and authorize the town manager to apply for the VLCT Welcoming and Engaging Communities Cohort.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed? So we've taken care of that, and Eric will get you information, and we'll be looking back for your input, both Jeff and I think Greta by Friday. So moving then to the development bylaw amendments and the form-based code overlay. And tonight, I'd like to take up the 6 items that we can, if we can tonight, and see whether we'd like to make changes. And since there's only 4 of us tonight, I'm thinking that if we wish to make changes, it would take 2 of us at least tonight to say, yes, we want to change, and we'd have to wait to make a decision on that until we have a full board. If we have 3 or more that wants to make a change, or then we could discuss that tonight. And obviously, if there's no changes requested on any of these, we could also work on those tonight. So Eric, why don't you just lead off, and then we can have Matt, we can go do one at a time with a very brief introduction as to what the opportunities are.
Yep, so just for the board and folks listening and watching at home, just kind of let everyone know where we are in this process. The Select Board's been reviewing and discussing a development bylaw amendment to establish a form-based code overlay district in the Taft Corners area of town over the course of several meetings this year. At the last discussion on July 19th, the board received an overview from staff on some possible changes to consider to the transmitted amendment by the Planning Commission. This agenda item this evening, as Terry mentioned, is a discussion for the board to consider any possible changes to the transmitted form-based code and the official map. And staff seeks any direction on possible changes to make. As a reminder, should the board reach consensus to make any substantive changes, scheduling a new public hearing would be required under this process. Should the board not wish to make any substantive changes, an action item to consider adopting the bylaw amendment as transmitted could be added to a future select board meeting agenda. Upon direction of the board, staff will then prepare for the next discussion, either consider action to warn a new public hearing, adopt the bylaw amendment as transmitted, or continue discussion on possible changes to the transmitted draft as being discussed tonight. I've included in your packet a copy of Planning Director Matt Belanger's memo from July 19th that outlines these discussion points for this evening. If there's no other process questions, I'll turn things over to Matt to kick things off here.
Great, thank you. Eric, are you able to screen share the memo?
Yes, I will figure that out.
If there's a request to, I think you'll be able to do it more quickly than
Sure.
than I will.
It'll keep me busy.
as I'm trying to talk. So, Chair McKay, would you like to just jump right into the first item and go from there without any other overview, or do you want any more overview of the 6 items on the memo?
I think I'd like to take them one at a time.
Yep.
Starting with number 1, and then a very brief overview of what the Planning Commission has proposed and what the options are.
Sure. So item 1 is related to the Essex Alliance Church property, former Essex Alliance Church property, approximately 55 acres in the northeastern portion of the Form-Based Code Overlay District. This land is proposed in the draft before you to be part of the regulating plan and building form standards, et cetera, that are proposed in this draft. There's been a request from a developer with interest in this property, Mr. Chris Snyder, to remove this property from the Form-Based Code Overlay District. Mr. Snyder has a pending application before the Development Review Board, as illustrated by the pictures that you see on the lower half of the screen right now. The upper image with the yellow streets is the regulating plan map in the draft code. They are different. Mr. Snyder's proposal is vested under the current zoning bylaws because a complete application was filed prior to the first hearing of the form-based code. And that application includes the overall layout as shown in those lower images, as well as about 75% of the dwelling units proposed in the project. So the request before the board is a fairly simple one. Take it out of the form-based code area, leave it in the Taft Corners zoning district, which is the underlying zoning district, and make it subject to those remaining development standards.
Good, thank you. So I'm interested in knowing whether there is support for changing and doing what Mr. Snyder has recommended. And in my mind, I would support the change to option to go back to totally the code that exists right now for this particular piece of property. Is there anyone else who wishes to support that?
Well, the one thing I want, before I answer that question, would be, if I understand correctly, about 75% of the property would be covered by is already vested, and it would be about 25% of the property that is not vested. So if this parcel of land stays within the form-based code area, it would only affect 25%. It would affect that 25% of the property.
Correct, and it would affect essentially about 25% of the dwelling units in the buildings they were contained in. So the first phase involves a complete subdivision plat, a layout of all of the streets, the utilities, the entire overall arrangement of the property, where the various dwelling unit types would be installed. So what's left is, you have a vested layout, a vested possibly even building footprint. You might be applying the architectural standards of the new code to those unpermitted buildings to the extent that that code does not conflict with whatever the application is vested in. For example, the location or footprint, means of access, et cetera, and other things that are determined as part of the first phase.
Okay. Yep.
So just so I'm clear, I'm sorry if this is a stupid question, and yes, there are such things. The 75% of the project is not going to be affected by the new zoning regs? Because
Yes.
it's already vested?
So long as the project proceeds
Right.
in an orderly manner through the permitting process, that's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So the Planning Commission, this March 15th decision, that was 2022, decided to keep the remaining 25% in the form-based code.
They decided to keep this property in. I mean, at that time, the application
Right.
hadn't been fully filed yet.
Okay. I'm inclined to trust the Planning Commission's decision, and to keep the property within the form-based code.
My question, and I know it's only I can answer it, how I feel, but my question would be is, how significant of a benefit is it of keeping it in the form-based code? If the project were not to proceed, yeah, I think there is a pretty good benefit of doing that. Most likely, the project is going to proceed, meaning, 75% is vested. And if that's the case, and that's what I have to assume the case would be, I'm not convinced there is a large enough benefit to keeping the property in the form-based code. I'll end it right there.
That's my thought as well. I would agree with Terry to exclude it.
So I believe I hear you're agreeing with my interpretation that we
Yes,
would
that's
not.
correct.
Right.
Maybe using different words or different rationale,
Yeah.
but I'm agreeing with it should not be included. This property should not be included in the form-based code area.
So I think I hear three of us that say that, which would be a majority. And so we can, I think when we have a full board, we can come back to all of these and take a full vote and then go forward with a proposal to submit back to the planning commission.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, anything that's staff's thought is preparing a kind of updated version, so then the board could consider that updated version based on these discussions to direct staff to warn a new public hearing, at which time the planning commission would then provide comment to the board as part of that process.
And can I ask another question? I assume this would be considered a significant change?
Yes.
This
It
on
would
its
be,
own?
yep.
Okay,
Any of these items the board is looking at this evening
Okay.
would be a significant change.
okay.
Moving on to number 2.
All right, so this is the Burr Oak Knoll and LaPierre lands, Allenbrook Development Incorporated. This is the lands surrounding the Cottonwood Crossing development. And the request that the Planning Commission and Select Board have heard here is related to adding more developable area to this property on the regulating plan. If we go to the graphic, if you could scroll down just a little bit, Eric. Thank you. So those two near the bottom of the screen show on the right the regulating plan for this area as transmitted by the Planning Commission to the Select Board, and the large green area you see in the middle of the graphic is the Burr Oak Knoll. The small roundabout toward the top of the screen above that is the existing roundabout or square about in Cottonwood Crossing. And then if you scroll down just a little bit, Eric, so in the graphic on the left, you see a regulating plan with some added red areas. Those are added developable areas that the Planning Commission considered but chose not to forward to the Select Board. And then finally, what's on your screen now is on the right, a drawing submitted by the landowner requesting added developable areas and an area shown in blue that would be removed from the form-based code area. That area is abutting the right-of-way of Interstate 89 and the Velco power line easement. And then on the right side is just a version of that was drawn by the town's consultant, essentially in regulating plan form. So again, showing added developable areas on the regulating plan in red, and an area to be removed from the form-based code area would revert to base zoning, which in this case is the mixed-use residential zone. And that's what's under consideration in this change.
Okay. So I guess the question is then, is there support for any kind of a change that's been requested by the developer.
Well, I'd like to start that discussion by talking about the regulating plan itself and the ability to modify the regulating plan over time. That's a question for you, Matt.
Sure.
And what I'm getting at is my understanding is the regulating plan is and should be modified over time. So here's a specific request from the property owner. I'm not sure I'm ready to move ahead with his thoughts, his desires, his request. But I like the idea that leaving it open for discussion over time, in other words, kind of the bonus option that you're talking about in your memo, your discussion of the option. So my personal feeling is I don't see a significant reason to change the regulating plan now, as long as we have the option to do it down the future, if we can mutually agree to do that. And there is a efficient method in which the regulating plan can be, revised. So that's where I sit. I guess the simple answer is I'm not in favor of it, but I like the option that you threw out there.
So, what you're alluding to is there's a bylaw amendment process that's always available to the town under conventional zoning, regulating plan, official map, whatever tool the town is using here. And the town can come back if there's new knowledge or a desire on the part of the property owner to work with the Planning Commission and Select Board to come up with a different design. What is drawn in the regulating plan as transmitted by the Planning Commission, and most likely in some of these possible amendments, is a statement of policy that this is what a walkable Taft Corners looks like. The block dimensions are there, the connectivity is there. In the draft transmitted by the Planning Commission, there are some public view sheds to the mountains off to the east that public comment said were important to people in Taft Corners. There's conservation of some of the area on the Burr Oak Knoll, which is a long-standing town goal. So the things that underpin that, you have in front of you a couple of different drawings that achieve those goals to different degrees. We do know there are constraints on this parcel that don't have valid delineations right now. We know that things shift around when people identify those constraints. I would say that the further out into the future you go, when you're considering what might happen in portions of Taft Corners, the more likely the board or a future board is to consider changes to that layout based on what people discover about constraints, what the market wants, what technology is, all of those things. So contrast to the last item you considered where there's a pending development proposal that's actually quite a long ways along in the process. Here we have a piece of land that's been looked at, but that we don't have a pending proposal on.
Okay, good.
I see this as an integral piece of the Taft Corners area. And so I think that I would say not to make any change at this point. But I agree with Jeff that obviously, as with everything, there should be opportunity to reconsider and amend as necessary. And so I appreciate that the process is clearly delineated for doing that, and that this is, a working, living, breathing thing.
Why was the Planning Commission tied 3-3?
I think going back to see where they landed on that. They were first tied 3-3, then they sort of talked it out. I'm sorry, I just wanted to read the notes that I gave you on this and recall that. I think there was a feeling that on this property, as Mr. Senecal stated to the Planning Commission, there's an awful lot of green. There's a lot of land in the transmittal draft considered for conservation or to not be developed. Part of that is that resource delineation of the Bur Oak Knoll. Part of that is as we move to the east, we run into wetlands. And so I think, you know, that said, and in hearing the applicant out, there were planning commission members who felt, well, you know, looking at the different quadrants of Taft Corners, this is one where there's quite a lot more resource protection land identified. Is there a way to add more developable area? I think the other consideration they gave was that there's quite a lot of linear distance of street in this piece of the regulating plan that in the transmittal version is only developable on one side. So you still have to build the whole street, but you're only unlocking the development potential of land on one side. That, you know, changes how much development potential is available to support the cost of constructing that infrastructure. So I think there was some consideration there as well.
Well, I think I'd either lean toward revising the regulating plan or directing the staff to draft a select board policy for efficient, transparent process and considering regulating plan amendments.
Okay.
And I would agree to keep the regulating plan as is with the possibility of more information coming forward and the plan being changed, and also support the getting a draft of a policy for the select board for the transparent process for considering regulating plan amendments, so that doesn't get tied up for months and months. Mm-hmm. I presume that would come as a separate item rather than being part of the vote that we would have.
That's correct. As a policy, it would not be part of the bylaws. It would be something we would draft for you to look at separately.
Good. So it sounds like we have 4 of us in favor of keeping the plan as it is right now.
3.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to Taft Corners Commercial Park.
Okay, so now we're in the southwest corner of Taft Corners, southwest quadrant. This is predominantly lands owned by J.L. Davis Realty or Taft Corners Associates. And there are really 2 core requests here, and they're sort of interrelated. One is a request to change the southern boundary of the form-based code overlay district. And TCA or Mr. Davis have suggested the center line of Marshall Avenue as a place to relocate that boundary to. That would leave more of the area between Marshall Avenue and Interstate 89 in the underlying mixed-use commercial zoning district. One possibility the Planning Commission considered that we also show here is the idea of moving the boundary north, but not quite all the way to Marshall Avenue, but rather 150 feet south of Marshall Avenue. This would allow for the same kind of development to be built on both sides of that street. In other words, without the street being the boundary, you have the same sort of height buildings, same scale, same character on both sides over time. So that was something the Planning Commission considered. The other thing that really underpins this is that in the form-based code overlay district, regardless of which color street you are on the regulating plan, you have a minimum building height of either 2 or 3 stories, and usually 3 stories. And Mr. Nick and Mr. Davis expressed that they are aware of retailer interest in Taft Corners, interest from retailers who would develop sites in Taft Corners who do not find that what they do is compatible with a multi-story building. And I think that's been expressed to the select board as well. So 2 thoughts to hold in your mind here. One is that 1-story buildings are absolutely allowed and okay in the mixed-use commercial zoning district. So where that boundary lands between the form-based code overlay and the mixed-use commercial district affects how much land remains where single-story buildings are allowed. The other thought, and the board may want to talk about this more when we talk about building height, is for the board to think about where or how or why a minimum building height might be required. And there are some reasons to do that in terms of encouraging efficient use of land, encouraging mixed use and or predominantly residential build out in the district, encouraging buildings that form a cohesive streetscape, and gaining the kind of density in Taft Corners that starts to give it the vibrancy of a downtown as expressed as a town plan goal. So when you're thinking about where this boundary might land, it could be the boundary between single-story buildings and multi-story buildings being allowed. But you may also, when you think about building height, ask us to present you with an adjusted draft that allows single-story buildings as a minimum height in some parts of the district. So two ways of approaching a similar development standard.
Two ways to skin the bird, if you will.
So we're following up on your last statement. If we were to approve the plan as it is, you would, but ask the planning commission to come back with a different model. Is that what you're suggesting?
If you were to approve it as transmitted,
Yeah,
there would be a minimum building height, generally in this area, of 3 stories.
yeah,
And then when you crossed the boundary at the Harvest Lane Circle or Depot Road, you would be out of the district and you'd be in the mixed-use commercial district where the development standards allow for single-story buildings and, allow for a number of other site arrangements and other things that are not allowed in the form-based code area. So that's what you have. If you were to choose to move the boundary, that's a substantive change. Goes back for comment from the Planning Commission, occasions another hearing. Sounds like we're headed that way anyway. But the other thing I think to understand is that some of the discussion of this boundary move has been very much about the requirement of minimum building heights in this part of town. And I think what we're hearing from the landowners is they think that multi-story, mixed-use, or residential build-out in the Harvest Lane area is a really, really long way away. They don't see that as a potential for this part of town.
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
So I want to follow up on this concept of allowing single-story buildings in perhaps a part of the form-based code area. Kind of the concept might be is that we would, the code would allow for, and I'm going to use the word that, the big box retail, sorry if that has a negative, people would rather I choose to describe the retail other ways, but that somehow conformed with the form-based code in terms of architectural, whatever, features, somehow, and I don't know if this is even possible, conformed with the code regarding parking. Is that possible?
Well, I think the town has experienced challenges with particularly that issue about relating the building to the parking even under its current standard. So the current development standards in mixed-use commercial generally say bring the building up to the street, bring the building to the sidewalk. This tends to push some or all of the parking to the rear of the building. There are retailers who would like to be in buildings in Williston who having the parking behind the building or having a front and rear entrance to the building just doesn't match what they do. They may not like the logistics of having a rear entrance. They may really desire the advertising of ample parking that comes from having the parking in front of the building. That's why big box and strip mall development has the parking in front, because the customer driving by sees that it will be easy to park there. Right? It's seen as an amenity. So that's in tension with the town's desire to gain that walkable downtown feel. Walkable downtowns generally have buildings fronting on their streets and not generally parking lots.
Okay. The,
Oh, sorry, keep going.
well, it's the,
Sorry. No.
the image that's behind Greta on the left, which I have labeled in mine as the compromise version, which would move the form-based code area to the north to 150 feet south of Marshall Avenue. I'll start, I'm sorry, I'm going to take a step back. I was initially not in favor of the concept of moving any of the area between Marshall Avenue and, let's say, the interstate out of the form-based code. But I've come to understand what the feeling is about allowing there to be this use to remain in Williston. There's a reason for it, there's a need, there's a function that's being met. What I'd like about the compromise is it allows that to be expanded somewhat, but also, what are the right words? I guess I might as well be blunt. By having the line be south of Marshall Avenues, the buildings that do meet the form-based code, because they'll be at least 3 stories or higher, are going to hide in a sense. I mean, that may not be the best word, but you're still going to get good separation between the form-based code area and its function and the large retail single-story establishments, probably with their parking maybe in front, that really defines that type of retail. But it's still, again, my words may not be the best, but it's still it's still well managed to a certain part of Taft's Corners. I don't know if I expressed myself well there at all. I guess after vocalizing that, I'm in favor of the compromise solution. Now, I have no idea if that will work for the landowner. It just works for me.
I was just, for me, I think, from the feedback we've heard from the public and from all the input you got in the development of the plan, of the form-based code process, I think that the town, the vision that folks have for our town is this walkability, this bikeability, this, more efficient town with more housing. And so I think the idea that we could just separate this part of town and just say, well, it's single story and that's going to be it. And, I feel like, we want to include this as part of our town and want to be able to not just say, well, it's the big box section of town. I would love to see this become a source of pride for our town and a place where we don't just say, it's where Walmart is. So I'm in favor of leaving the plan, leaving it in the form-based code as is, because I want to be proud and I want folks to feel excited and invigorated about all parts of our town, and again, not just say, well, that's that part.
I'm intrigued by Jeff's proposal. I like the idea, so that would be me. I hear what you're saying, Greta. I guess my thought is that there are different parts of town. I mean, there's the ag rural part, and there's Taft's Corners, and Jeff's idea, I think, kind of makes it graded. I am concerned that I'll stop there.
And I just want to add to that. I'm not the author of that idea. I just like it. I really should give credit to, I believe you, Matt.
I think probably our consultant, and coming out of our process with the Planning Commission, they certainly wrestled with this issue.
I was going to say we should call it the Fears Amendment.
As long as you don't call it the Fairs Memorial Amendment.
Let's see how the rest of the evening goes, I guess.
So I do support the compromise as well. Option 2, which is shown on image 3C, of moving the line to the north. So that gives us 3 votes for the revision and 1 for keeping it as in. And so that's a majority, and we can move along.
All right. We're going to move on to talk about building height. I think it's fair to say that most of the public comment directed at the Planning Commission and Select Board in the negative about the form-based code project is about allowing higher maximum building heights. So what we've tried to do in your memo is summarize a little bit about what those maximums are in the transmittal draft, how they are measured, and why they are what they are, and why the Planning Commission transmitted a draft to the Select Board that includes maximum heights of 5 stories with a potential 6th attic story on top. And, you know, really, I think the struggle the Planning Commission had was wanting to present a plan that did provide some flexibility on height in the hopes that greater amounts of housing and hopefully eventually more affordable housing could be produced within that height. More dwelling units split the high cost of the land underneath the building and maybe make the project more feasible. So you have 2 districts within the code area that allow 5 stories with a flat top. It's 5 stories at 64 feet to the top plate above the clear sidewalk. So we wanted to remind folks that we're measuring from that sidewalk elevation up and provide the image at the bottom of this page of Finney Crossing showing on one side of the street a building that starts relatively at grade with the sidewalk versus a building that starts about 4.5 or 5 feet above the sidewalk. It's been, you know, mounded up around the foundation. So today we measure height from the average finished grade. We literally just look for where the dirt touches the concrete, run the tape from there. So part of this is, well, that's not how anybody walking down the street experiences the building. So this draft has a slightly different measurement technique, and you know that's probably only going to be about a 4 or 5 foot difference most of the time, but it's worth thinking about. And we're going 5 stories max or 64 feet max to the top of the top plate, essentially the top of the structure that holds in that 5th story. And then there is an allowance for an attic story on top of that if the building uses a pitched roof format. We have a minimum 512 pitch allowed and a maximum 1412 pitch. That means it's a real pitched roof that looks like it from the street, and it means that generally to create that attic story you're going to need to use some dormers and create some architectural interest on that upper story. The pitched roof interaction with building height comes from the Planning Commission's interest in having something be uniquely Williston about this form-based code. And you know, most denser downtowns tend to have a lot of flat roof buildings. So the thought was, what if there was an incentive to do some pitched roof buildings in there as well? So all of that plays into building height. These maximum heights are taller than what's allowed under today's zoning. Today's zoning allows buildings up to 52 feet above the average finished grade, and it allows them at 3 or 4 stories generally. So best worst example, the Blair Park Hotel currently under construction, 4 stories. pretty much dead on 52 feet from average finished grade to the top of a relatively flat pitched roof. We've gotten comment that some people don't like how that looks, or that it looks over large, or out of place. There's a bunch of things about the architecture of that building that wouldn't be allowed or would be different under the draft form-based code, but it's an example of a 4-story building in Williston. So the maximum in the transmittal draft you have is a 5+1, and remembering that under, between those minimum and maximum pitched roofs, if there is a 6th story, the volume of the building that occurs above that 5th story is greatly and rapidly reduced, while theoretically adding some visual interest to the building. Okay. And we gave you 4 options. Actually, sorry, it's numbered 1, 2, 4. It's 3 options plus a bonus option as ways you could think about addressing building height. It is true that, for example, allowing a very, very steep pitched roof on a building at its maximum allowed depth could result in a building over 100 feet tall, which is a lot taller than the tallest building in Taft Corners today. So you could impose an overall maximum height in feet such that even if you had a pitched roof, you still had to come under that. And we could prepare some options for you to think about that way. You could think about revising building height in terms of the maximum number of stories that are allowed, dropping from 5 to 4, for example. That's a relatively easy edit for the staff to make. It has all the implications that the Planning Commission thought about when they came up with your transmittal draft. And the other way to do things is much more complicated, which is we look at the colors of the streets on the regulating plan, which do correlate to some different allowed building heights, and we start rearranging them. But that is a way to adjust height.
Who would like to be first?
If we capped the overall building height to 81 feet, would that impose significant limitations on the ability to have that 6th story usable attic space in any way?
So 81 feet gives you about 15 feet, I think, above that 64-foot top plate. It's probably a little tight for a true attic story. You're probably starting to compromise on some ceiling heights or something like that. We calculated that at assuming that the roof pitch happens on the short side of a rectangular building, maximum allowed depth is 80 feet. So the other part of that calculation is that's an 80-foot max depth building with the flattest possible roof. It's pretty likely that most buildings will not max out that 80-foot allowed depth. In our, what we call a double-loaded apartment building where there's a hallway down the middle and apartments on both sides of it, 65, maybe 70 feet. So now you can have a little bit of a steeper roof because the gable has gotten narrower. So yeah, theoretically at that max depth building, the flattest possible pitched roof, you're starting to get a pretty tight squeeze. But maybe it's not happening on the max depth building. It might be happening on a 65-foot deep building, and that 512 pitch can now be something a little steeper, get a little more height, and you can access the pitched roof. So I guess this, in a really general sense, the other thing to understand about building height is there are a whole bunch of variables underneath this driving the maximum size of that building. So there's the build-to line, size of the lot, the need either under the minimum standards of the zoning or developer's preference to provide parking, the requirement for minimum open area equal to 15% of the developable area of the lot, the need to provide access, and a number of other design constraints. So planners, we're always living in the worst case scenario where someone says, what if somebody maxes out these standards? And that's certainly what we're talking about here. But we know from experience that there are usually other factors that will prevent something from being built in all of the maximum dimensions.
So Matt, the question I have is the 4 areas, is that the right word?
Yep.
Or form-based code district names, the 4 of them. Those are part of the regulating plan.
They are.
And the regulating plan could be changed over time as we start to see how Taft's Corners is building out, how it's starting to feel. We may want to alter. For instance, what is the, town center as, part of this? I assume we can also change the building height if we start to figure out it's too low, too high, whatever it is. The difficulty I have is it's hard for me to envision what is the impact of these stories, number of stories. Yeah, 5 stories and a attic sounds like a lot, but I don't know that it is a lot if it's done in the right way. These buildings, how they fit together type of thing. So I guess I'm having trouble with the concept of we have to change it from what's being proposed. But I do like where you have your bonus option down below. Because it would add maybe some more definition to what is the maximum height the building could be.
Right.
So that's where I sit on this.
So I'm not sure which one you favor.
What it means is don't change anything right now, because.
Just leave it as it is.
Leave as is, because as with all aspects of the regulating plan, it's subject to change down the road as we start to figure out it makes sense to change, if we start to figure out it makes sense to change it.
I'm not sure, Greta, which one you want.
I'm not in favor of changing the maximum stories. I do think that consolidated growth is what most folks in Williston we've heard from have been advocating for, and that increased housing and affordable housing and those sorts of things. And this bill, the maximum 5 stories, I think, allows for that as a greater possibility. Obviously no one's going to make any guarantees on that, but I think it allows for greater possibility. I do think, again, that, the 81-foot potential is somewhat of a compromise I could see, because, that, again, there is, as Jeff said, that limitation to the maximum building height, and that it's, not going to reach the absolute threshold of, but that attic space is appealing, and that is another potential residential unit that is desperately in need in our town, in our state, in our country right now, is housing. That is a real problem. So I guess I'm in favor of leaving it as is.
So are you saying leaving it as is and not putting the 81?
And not putting the 81, yeah. I mean, yeah.
My preference is to use the bonus option and with a maximum height of 81 feet.
That was me too. That's where I go.
So we'll be waiting for the 5th vote. The next meeting on this, we have a 2-2. Moving on to green spaces.
Wait, before we do, is it really 2-2 or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you want the bonus option.
Well, I guess I'm not sure, I mean, we all seem to be in favor of keeping the building heights as they are currently.
3 to 4 stories, which is current.
We're all in favor of keeping the 5-story maximum.
Right, depending on what area you're in of the.
Right.
I guess the only thing we're disagreeing on is how the bonus option should be done. I'm not sure we should limit to 81 feet. I just don't know if that's the right number right now. So in terms of keeping the plan as is in terms of the building height, I think we're 4-0. It's what we might have a little bit of difference on is how we want the bonus option implemented. Does that make sense? Did anybody follow that?
It's not what I heard, but
Okay.
I think when we have a full board, we can revisit this.
So yeah, so I think, so everybody wants to keep it as 5 stories, right, as the maximum allowable stories, but.
Could you put up the screen again that has the building height?
But Ted and Terry are saying limit the roof pitch possibility to 81 feet for total building height. And as far as I can tell, you and I are both saying, don't limit the roof pitch height, let it to the maximal allowable roof pitch, which is 100 and whatever.
It can go a little over 110, I
Yeah.
think, with the steepest pitch on top of 64
Yeah.
at 80.
So it's more about the slope of it than the.
Okay, but, okay, so kind of why we're 2-2 is because of, if we keep the regulating plan the way it is right now, it allows over 110 feet or 110 feet plus or minus, and Terry and Ted are saying, no, we want to limit that to 81 feet. Okay, all right. Okay.
Moving on.
Great. And we can present you with some pictures of what those max limits look like and how they interact with roof pitch. So topic 5 was green space. And I think this was an item of significant discussion with the select board, mostly in terms of potential cost to the town of acquiring and/or developing and maintaining these green spaces versus some of what the public input and planning commission said about Taft Corners, which was, given the strong desire for a significant residential build-out in the area, it was important to the planning commission that the bulk of the area be easily accessible to public green space, either in the form of a structured park or a more primitive park with trail walking opportunities, et cetera. So the maps you see on your screen right now, one shows the regulating plan with the proposed green spaces mapped on it. And remember that those are also reflected in the official map and subject to the official map process requiring that development accommodate those green spaces given a short time frame in which the select board can decide whether to pursue their acquisition or not. And if the select board chooses not to pursue their acquisition, then the development no longer has to accommodate the mapped green space. The map with circles on it shows a 2.5-minute walking distance from those green spaces, essentially showing the coverage of the plan area with green spaces. So I think what I was really hearing from the board here was a desire for some more explanation about how official map works and what is the town committed to in terms of these spaces. So I think I've used the term wish list or statement of policy. Regulating plan and the official map are both well understood that way, in that it says to the select board and the town of Williston would like the opportunity to have these green spaces created, accommodated by future development and conveyed to the town as part of future development. But in each of their cases, and each time a development is proposed that's either going to accommodate or conflict with these, the select board would like the opportunity to make a decision at that time. So couple of things to think about in terms of that process. One is what official map statute says is development shall accommodate. It does not say that the town has to immediately develop that space into a public park or take it over right away or do anything in particular with it. But it does say that the town has to have the chance to acquire that land to create that green space. Reminding the select board that also in this draft, underpinning this, is the concept of adding these mapped green spaces to the project list in the recreation impact fee, making their provision something that makes the developer owner eligible for offset of the recreation impact fees that would otherwise be due per dwelling unit on any residential development. So the hope here is that the incentives have been set up in the best way possible to encourage the gradual development of these public green spaces as part of new residential and commercial development that comes into Taft Corners, giving the town adequate time to plan for their either acquisition or for their ownership to come to the town, and for the town to ultimately take on their development and maintenance. So I felt with this issue, there was a lot of debate at the Planning Commission about how much green space, how big the green spaces should be, and how they should be distributed throughout the area, with some Planning Commission members wanting to see quite a lot more on the map, some feeling that what was there was adequate. I think when we came to the select board conversation, it really shifted to just what are we committing the town to here, and how are we going to pay for all of this? And the answers to that question are, number one, hopefully you don't have to pay for all of it. Hopefully some of it comes to the town as part of new development that accommodates these planned facilities. The second part is you always have a choice. When a new development is imminent, you can always say, well, we said we wanted you to accommodate this green, but we don't think we're in a position to have it, or we agree with you that it's not the right place for it, our goals have shifted. That's part of the official map process. So again, it's a wish list, it's a statement of policy. Does it have enough green on it? There were Planning Commission members who felt no, it should have more. But the reality of Taft Corners, as I reminded folks, is the town of Williston owns almost zero land in Taft Corners. And so this is a big shift of policy to plan for these public green spaces in this area of town.
Good, thanks. So I remember Ted saying that the simple answer is this gives the town the first recusal on the property. And I would suggest keeping it as it is.
That would be my position as well. I do anticipate that as development actually happens with this, that the town is going to be confronted with any number of situations where it says, boy, that's a great green space, we can't afford it.
In kind of the concept, I'm in agreement. It's almost kind of self-regulating in that way. Not self-regulating, but self-limiting. You know, our financial resources are going to be a piece of the puzzle of whether it can actually happen or not.
I think that it also gives us the opportunity to, as the development happens, to see what folks really want and need and what we can utilize and all of that in terms of the green space and what might become priorities as far as green space in this area. And so if there's, you know, certain spaces that we want to concentrate our dollars on, then we can do that. And I think, you know, we've heard from folks that, you know, they're concerned that form-based code is potentially like, you know, taking the select board out of this process. And I think this is one way that the select board is remaining in this process. And
we have no choice.
Yes, well, right. But I think, you know, yeah. So I'm in favor of leaving it as is.
4-0, so moving it along.
All right, well, we're at our final topic of the memo, which is the administrative approval process. So as drafted and transmitted by the Planning Commission, site development, the arrangement of a site and the design and development of a building on that site, which today would be reviewed by the town's Development Review Board, is proposed to be reviewed under a process that is still publicly accessible, but is done by the zoning administrator, myself or deputy or successor. So we talk about a permit as something called a certificate of conformity in this process. We talk about the public meeting that is held, which is warned and noticed to abutters just like a DRB meeting, but it's not a hearing. We call that a project review meeting. And it's a different process. It is a little more streamlined. That project review meeting is likely the culmination of many months of an applicant meeting with and working with the planning and zoning and other town staff to hash out all of the various design things that need to be figured out when somebody's developing a site. Where the utilities go, what's the access going to be like for the fire department, does it meet the form-based code, et cetera. So at the core of this, the question for the select board is, are you in favor of the drafted process in which the permit to build the building is issued administratively and not by a citizen board, but rather by a town employee, the zoning administrator? And understanding that that process lives within statutory permit procedures in Vermont, which means any decision made by the zoning administrator is appealable to the Development Review Board, can be taken to that level, and any decision taken by the Development Review Board is appealable to the State Environmental Court, and thence to the Supreme Court, if we're really going for it. So we tried to give some context in the memo here of just what Development Review Board review of major sites and new buildings looks like today. Not to sort of toot our own horn, but there's an incredible amount of staff work that goes into preparing those reviews for the DRB to look at this point. And there is all of that preparatory work with the various commenting departments, et cetera, culminating in a public hearing that is often 95% a recitation of the ways in which the project complies with the town's bylaws. And the other 5% is there's a couple of judgment calls for the DRB to make. And we do our best as staff to highlight those and give the DRB what we think their options are or draft conditions we think they might need to consider in order to complete that review. So that's the way it works today. We hear feedback sometimes that citizens believe the DRB process is a rubber stamp process. And it can look like that if you just come and watch the hearing, because somebody spent a month and a half writing a 30-page staff report and working with the applicant to say, no, you got to change this before it comes to the DRB. It won't be approved unless you do that, et cetera. This process with staff report, application checklists, and detailed review that the Planning Commission asked us to build into the administrative process is as rigorous as the DRB process, but having had the sneak peek into some of the application review materials the consultant's developing for us, I would say is even more accessible. What lives underneath this process that we're having developed by our consultant is a line-by-line checklist for compliance with this code. So literally, the applicant needs to say, yes, I am meeting, A sub D in the building form standards, and I'm meeting it on page A1. They have to tell me that. And I have to look at that, and then I have to initial the third box that I concur that that's been met. And this was really strong feedback we got from the Planning Commission. We don't just want people to be aware that there's been a permit approval and have the opportunity to appeal it. We want people to know what were the findings in as plain English as possible that the staff was making in order to generate that approval. So that if there was something they did not like about that approval, they would be able to look at that review and understand the relevance of what had happened and be able to make a pointed argument and an informed argument in favor of their appeal should they choose to make one. So that's what we've built underneath it. The goal has been to have a little more efficiency and a little more transparency at the same time, but it's not a public hearing. It's not subject to the warning requirements or the advertising requirements under statute. It's subject to the policies that are adopted in here. This is one place where we disagreed with our legal review because we added additional folks who would have to be notified in the notification. So it wasn't just direct abutters, meaning property owners adjacent, but also anybody who lived in the properties adjacent, which is not something that statute requires. There's been a couple of bills, a couple of attempts to change that in Vermont, but it's not happened. We often hear from abutters in the DRB process, well, I'm in the condo association and this building is right next to me and I never heard about this proposal. Well, it's because the association president got the letter. Our legal counsel said, he struck it and he said, don't do this, you don't have to do it. And we went, when we had our conversation, we said, well, the reason that's in there is because the Planning Commission felt really strongly that there be broad notification of any actions taken administratively under this. So that's just a little bit of context here. That said, we do, as I said, run a very efficient DRB review process. The change here that you could consider would be to change that permit review process and essentially take everything here that the zoning administrator does and instead say this is something that the DRB needs to do as a public hearing.
All of what the administrator does would be appealable to the DRB?
That's correct.
All of it?
The checklist you were just referring to, in order for it to result in a, I forget what the term is, certificate of conformity, would they all have to be yeses or?
Yes. Or not applicable for some reason, okay. But yes.
Right, okay.
You have to meet all the requirements.
The standard of review that the DRB would use for the administrator's findings, would that be like a de novo review? Like, we're going to look at this again and see whether we agree that he got it right or wrong, and if we don't agree with it, then we're going to substitute our own judgment? Or would it be like looking like a appellate court does, saying, well, was there a mistake of law? Did he make a mistake in applying this? Right.
Probably more like the latter. So what we typically do when a zoning administrator's decision is appealed is we build a wall in the office. I assign one of the other staff to review the decision generally that I made. And they look at what the appellant is contesting. So they might say, I think Matt misapplied the building height standard. And the staff person would say, well, what was the decision Matt made? And under what are the applicable standards of the bylaw? And if there was an interpretation, how did that happen? And then that's presented by that staffer to the DRB. So it's not quite like an environmental court de novo review where we just say, this entire application is now before the DRB for consideration of all things. It's a focused review of the finding or conclusion or condition being appealed.
So would that, are you describing the process that would come into play under these, that it'd be a very focused review? Somebody would be able to appeal saying, I disagree with the decision that was reached by the administrator, decision 1, 2, 7, and 9, but not like the whole thing. Like the environmental court comes in and says, I am the DRB.
Right.
It wouldn't be that.
It would not be that.
But the environmental court under the state statute would still be able to come in and say, I am the DRB.
They can. And then they'd ask us to write a brief about 1, 2, 9, and 7,
Yeah.
which is what they always do. But yes, generally DRB's reviews of zoning administrator decisions are focused on the particular items at issue.
I don't have a problem with that.
I mean, it really comes down to, in a different sense of which is more appropriate to be issuing the certificate of conformity, a town staff or the zoning administrator or this volunteer board that has different opinions and viewpoints and that type of thing. If I understand correctly, the concept of the form-based code is to be very prescriptive in what it is requiring.
Right.
So, which to me means there's less opportunity for there to be differences of opinion about whether that requirement was met or not.
Correct. So under today's rules, use a variety of materials, but with restraint. How did Matt interpret that?
Yeah.
How does the DRB interpret it?
Yeah.
Under the form-based code, the primary facade material shall be at least 75% of the material used on the street-facing facade. It's math.
Okay.
And it, you know, really the development standards are intended in here to as much as possible be go, no-go standards.
Right, okay. Okay, good, thank you.
So where are you standing on this, as is, or?
As is.
I support as is.
And I think we have enough safeguards. I think the problem that some people raised was what happens if we have a rogue zoning administrator. And I think there's enough safeguards built into the process, so I'm in favor of leaving it as is as well. So that takes us to the end of this subject tonight. We will certainly bring it back for one more meeting to resolve that one issue that we have on the building height, and hopefully send this off to a public hearing.
Terrific, thank you.
Good, thank you. So we're moving on to the manager's report.
Before we move on, so we can't, we've already decided on at least some substantial changes, so we can't transmit it to you till we're clear on all 8 issues?
My preference would be to send it off in one package so that we only have to have one public hearing.
I get that, it's just, I'm thinking from a timing standpoint. You know, if the DRB is gonna need to start thinking about, you know, their response to our changes. You know, if they know 7 of the 8, maybe they can get started on those and wait for the 8th to come. Maybe that's not practical, or maybe that's illegal.
No, you know, the Planning Commission's role at this point is to correct the bylaw report, which is the document that describes what's happening, to reflect any changes made by the Select Board.
Okay.
And submit it back to the Select Board. In other words, they have a ministerial duty here, and then they can give you comment. But we'll keep them apprised of the direction
So they, in
you're
a
going
sense,
in.
are gonna get started on it.
Recording in progress.
Okay, good
Does
to
the
know.
150 days start again when we warn public hearing for the second time? Or, I mean, not that we should need the 150 days theoretically at that point, but, or is it just included in the current 150?
My take would be that the 150-day clock does not restart.
Okay.
Because what you're doing is you're holding a series of hearings.
Yeah.
You held a hearing on July 5th.
Right.
You know, but statute says something like prior to the final hearing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you've made substantive change, the Planning Commission's had the opportunity to correct the report, comment. Only, I think, if you truly sent the whole thing back to the Planning Commission and said, we want you to redraft things and hold your own hearing and retransmit, then you have a new first hearing and the 150-day clock would restart.
I think looking ahead at the calendar, should the board take this up, you know, say at the next meeting and this issue is resolved and direct staff to warn a public hearing, I anticipate with the warning requirements, that hearing would likely, double check this, would likely October the 4th, if not the second meeting in October, but depending how the board's work progresses on this last item, I could see that as within the timeline right now. And then once your final public hearing concludes, at that point you can consider an action item or repeat this process.
Moving along then to manager's report. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Just quick items to touch on my written report here. Got our last local options tax report for FY22. All good news here. Our receipts for FY22 were $3.7 million, which is the highest the town has ever brought in for a fiscal year for local options tax, from what I can tell in its 20 years. So all good news. You might recall in the budget process, staff, we had budgeted 3.1 million. We tried to always take a best conservative approach we can with this. Is very hard to predict. When we projected it would go, we would bring in at least 3.5 billion based on the first half of the year when we were doing the FY23 budget. You may recall that helped try to estimate where our fund balance would land as the board landed on the budget proposal. So overall, this is good news that we exceeded that number. I'll get an update on how our books ended at the end of the year from Shirley as she's working on that audit prep here, but all good news. We'll continue to watch it though. Just seeing how last quarter went, we still exceeded expectations, especially rooms and meals coming back to exceeding pre-pandemic levels a bit, but this is always something for the town to keep a close eye on. So good news, but it's quarter by quarter, so we'll keep our eye on it. Our community center scoping and library assessment RFQ, I originally had those due a couple weeks ago, and I got some good feedback from potential applicants that a lot of people are out of the office for the vacation, so I extended the deadline to September the 2nd. So that will likely garner a number of additional applications to review. So those will be due next week, and we plan to advertise the steering committee openings next week as well, and hopefully have some applicants from the board to consider late September, early October. Then I anticipate this will start really picking up speed probably in November or so. Yeah. At least getting started before the holidays, then really pick up steam in the new year. So keep the board updated on that.
One nitpicky question about this. It's an RFQ, not an RFP process?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Trying to find the best partner for the town. And
yep. And then worry about what's the cost after
yeah.
you choose the best. Okay.
Certainly we'll look at costs and what's budgeted, but something like this, the lowest bid proposal isn't necessarily the best proposal.
Right. No, absolutely agree. Okay.
Keep an eye on that. We're doing a project. Aaron in the manager's office is working on a quarterly report data review. Manager's office has prepared that for a number of years for the board. We're kind of looking at our performance indicators and the data and how that report's put together, meeting with each department head, and initial feedback is also looking for the board's thoughts on the quarterly report. So I would ask the board if you have feedback on what's contained in that report, what these performance indicators are. Is there something additional staff should think about including? Is there something maybe we should exclude? I think it's a good time to at least review it. The board might say it's great the way it is. Just looking for feedback, and we'll do some more staff research too on performance indicators and data-driven decision-making is really, I feel, important in public governance. So giving policymakers good information to make informed decisions. So that's one thing we try to do for the board each quarter to look at how operations are going and help you plan for the future. So if you have any feedback, please give me an email or a call roughly sometime in the next couple of weeks, as we'd like to prep any changes for the end of the first quarter for that report to have it clean for this fiscal year. So that'll be a project we're working on. Good news to report: the fire departments received a FEMA Fire Act grant and $106,000. This is a great grant, and a credit to Lieutenant Baker for taking the majority grant writing here. This is going to allow our department to have training on all our equipment, pumper apparatus, aerial apparatus, and so all our personnel can have the same level of training. This will cover the training course and also overtime for the staff to be hired back for additional training on their off time. So it really puts the town in a good condition to have all our staff well trained on all our equipment, especially all our new staff as well. And one more item, let's see. We're working to make a title change for DPW staff positions. We still use the word foreman for our supervisors in that department, so we're going to change that to supervisor to be gender neutral and more inclusive. We're going to be reposting now the highway supervisor position Mark Russell retired from. We had one process earlier this summer, but we're looking to see if there's some additional applicants to consider, so that will be reposted this week. That's all I have this evening for the board.
Good, thank you. Under other business, I think you have a temporary event catering permit to talk about.
Yep. It's at the Red Barn Gardens again. This is a rehearsal dinner on September the 3rd. is Shane Hospitality, doing business as Deli 126. I'm working with these folks to get, it's estimated about 50 people, so that would trigger a temporary event permit. It's not over 100, so staff could consider that administratively. We've been working with Red Barn Gardens. We're comfortable in all their setup right now for safety. So if the board would consider a motion to approve this catering permit, I might suggest on the condition that staff also approves a temporary event permit, which we intend to do.
So moved with the proposed condition.
Do I have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
50 people for a rehearsal dinner.
I was just saying that, what's the wedding size? Oof.
Yes.
And I just wonder, is it the rehearsal dinner for the wedding? I forget the date of the wedding they're having.
I believe so. I believe there's another wedding coming up, though, so.
Okay.
I have a catering permit for them as well, but that will tie to a temporary event permit. You'll get to see at your next meeting.
So we have a motion and seconded. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And no opposition. Any other business to bring tonight?
Final item, Terry, at your request, we had a temporary event for the Touch a Truck event last Saturday. Sounds like it was a very good turnout, but we did this outside of the meeting based on the timeline here and just asked the board's retroactive approval of that temporary event permit for posterity, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any other business to bring forward tonight? If not, thank you all. It's been a good meeting. We're adjourned.